think I need to thank Colin for that very generous introduction. I think maybe if we need anyone to do a voiceover in our corporate video or something, maybe we'll get Colin to do that. And hope that when you go onto our website and look at our reports, you find them as good as Colin describes.
They are as good.
Thank you. I feel slightly bad I don't have a jacket on. I'm impressed that the other speakers have kind of kept the formality of the proceedings by wearing their jackets, despite the fact that it's so hot in the Barbican Centre. I feel I'm kind of letting the side down here, so apologies for that. I didn't bring one with me today. I couldn't face wearing one on the train. So here to talk to you primarily about a report that we published a few weeks ago, this report, which was about assurance for high-risk projects. I think there's lots of kind of intricate relationships between the world of assurance and the world of outsourcing that I guess it's worth trying to tease out as we go through. I think, firstly, our report was about the high-risk projects that are going on across government. I'd say pretty much none of those are going ahead without a major element of outsourcing. If we think about the kind of things that are in specialist things that are in the major projects portfolio for government as a whole, it's pretty clear that government can't deliver most of the elements that are within them itself. I think also you can see it this way, that outsourcing itself is a project, and in that sense the kind of framework that you need in place around a major project to provide assurance, you also need in place around a major outsourcing contract. So I think that's another theme and another linkage to explore. I guess another way of looking at this graphically, if we're thinking about it from the perspective of this conference is about outsourcing. There's a number of different things that you want to do to achieve the overall outcome of keeping the contract performance, the outcomes that are being delivered from the contract on track. There's your kind of, maybe it's the wrong phrase, but the kind of the day-to-day contract management, the everyday managing the relationship with the supplier, managing the KPIs around the contract. That's an important part of keeping the contract on track. There's the wider relationship with the supplier that goes above and beyond that specific contract in most cases. So developing the right way of working collaboratively with the supplier, having a kind of mutual understanding and trust, having open and candid discussions about the respective organisational priorities of supplier and customer. But then there's also assurance. That's a key part of keeping performance on track, whether it's a project, whether it's outsourcing. These are the mechanisms that are independent of the day-to-day management and delivery of the contract, the project, that provide assurance to commissioners and sponsors and the people who are funding whatever activity we're looking at. So just thinking about a bit more about what's in this high-risk project portfolio, and I guess really here the main thing to do is just simply emphasise that government is as much commissioner, if not more commissioner here, than deliverer in terms of the mode that it's in. And it's seeking assurance as a commissioner. And there's examples here, again, to sort of drill in a little bit more to the kind of things that are in the major projects portfolio, whether it's the Olympics, whether it's building submarines, whether it's major IT projects. It's unlikely that the full capability and capacity to do all of that is available in-house in the public sector, hence outsourcing needed. So our piece of work that led to this involved quite a detailed review of the central assurance mechanisms. So these are the mechanisms not run within an individual public body, but run across government by Office of Government Commerce, by Treasury. So we're talking here about things like gateway reviews, we're talking about major projects review group. And the findings we've got here really, we certainly found that at the level of individual assurance mechanisms that there was some good progress being made and definitely some good work being done. But overall, we did find that we thought at the system level there were some pretty significant weaknesses in the way that assurance was run across government.
Sorry.
Don't worry.
Government keeps going, I'm afraid.
Very neat. The first one is definitely around the mandate. I think, as Colin said, around the collaborative procurement landscape, things are changing pretty rapidly in recent weeks. things are changing rapidly around an assurance mandate. I'll say a little bit more around that in a minute. But at the time we were looking, we did our fieldwork a few months ago. There wasn't always a clear mandate for assurance, a clear responsibility for assurance. There were degrees to which assurance, to be frank, could be wriggled out of in some cases. There was just enough ambiguity in the system to mean that really some projects that were high risk and in desperate need of central assurance probably weren't getting it, and likewise probably some of the projects that maybe in terms of cost, risk, political significance, maybe not necessarily always clear that they were the most compelling cases to be subject to that kind of significant assurance. So the mandate wasn't as clear and strong and unambiguous, and certainly in terms of follow-up action as a result of assurance, it wasn't clear that there were definite and clear consequences and actions that followed from the results of assurance. It was often quite dependent on really the willingness of the individual SRO of the project to engage or not engage with the recommendations. There wasn't the bite, there wasn't the grit, there wasn't the forced follow-up of particular actions. Certainly we talked in our report about the integration across the mechanisms. There's a number of different mechanisms operating at the central level alone, let alone the mechanisms that are in place in individual public bodies. We felt those needed to be better joined up in the context of a whole system design. In reality, the mechanisms had evolved from different starting points at different times to meet different perceived gaps in the overall system, but nobody had actually done this whole system design and this whole system integration piece. Poor planning was an issue for us. Assurance is often thought about late in the day when the project is already up and running. Resourcing of assurance, again, we were quite concerned about over-reliance on consultants here. When we looked at the makeup, the profile of gateway reviewers, particularly, a real dependence on consultants. We thought and think that those resources should almost universally be provided from within public bodies. It's not just a cost factor here. This is a great opportunity to go and learn from experience in another organisation about what are the issues around a project or a contract, and to bring those back as a reviewer into your own organisation, into your own job. So lots of learning opportunities missed, we felt there. Certainly something around over-focus on point-in-time assurance. I'll come back to that in a little bit more detail in a sec, but we just think that there should be a more flexible regime that does sort of build in elements of continuous assurance where appropriate, as well as the reliance on point-in-time. Focus on outcomes. A lot of the focus of assurance was very much around delivering against intermediate milestones, intermediate deliverables, not always necessarily a clear focus on are the benefits being delivered, what's the data showing about delivery against outcomes. And this is kind of backed up by some of the work that we've done previously on contract management and just looking at the KPIs that are used and the performance regime that's around contracts, and finding that that's very often very focused on the performance of the supplier in terms of delivering intermediate milestones, not really focused enough on the benefits that are being delivered, not really focused enough on the behaviour of the customer. When you talk to suppliers, they'll tell you that they're rarely asked for their feedback on the public sector as a buyer of services. I think there's a gap in the knowledge and a gap in the KPIs around that.